Recording in progress. Hey Darren, see you on there. Just so you know, you won't be able to vote remotely, but it's still worth, listening in and everything. Hopefully we
Okay.
still have a quorum without you, but just so you know, I won't be calling your name to try and vote on anything.
Okay.
The remote rules termed out, so they require you to be in person. So definitely for the next meeting, if you would, please attend in person. That one, we're going to actually take some action on some things. This one, even if we didn't have a quorum, we could still discuss all the things we're going to need to discuss today. So it's no big deal.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah. All right, welcome everybody. All right, with the time being 1:31 p.m., we'll call the May 22nd, 2024 STRGBA GSA meeting to order. Here in the room, member agencies, we have Ian from the city of Oakdale, Timothy from the city of Modesto. Darren actually is on the phone from the city of Burbank, so he won't be able to vote, but he'll be listening in. Mike here with the city of Waterford. Myself, Eric from OID, Jesse's here from MID, and Stanislaus County, we have Christy. So we have a quorum in every member agency at the meeting with City of Burbank over the phone. So welcome everybody. At this time, interested persons, so item number 2, interested persons are welcome to introduce any topic within the agency's jurisdiction. Matters presented under this heading may be discussed, but no action will be taken by the agency at this meeting. It's not required, but speakers may provide their name and address. Public comments will be limited to 5 minutes per speaker. I will start the video. Yep. Okay, good. Come on up. You don't mind speaking to the microphone just because while I get here.
Got it. I was just wondering if we'd be able to comment after each of these items, or when this. Okay, perfect.
Yeah, we'll have discussion on each item.
Okay,
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Anybody else?
Yes,
Mr. Outlaw.
design.
Yep.
Red thing or green?
It's on, yep.
Okay. My name is David Outlaw, with the ACLG, America's Constitutional Law Group, and just want to announce that we have some. We're going to be presenting a conference tomorrow at the House of Beef at 5:30. It's open to the public and mostly farmers. What we want to do is explain exactly what's going on here, and anything is we're going to be teaching land rights, water rights, positioning beauty as farmers, and inferior position they take, and certainly the most inferior position, state. And we have another seminar on Saturday. The first again discuss the rights and freedoms.
Okay.
You ready?
No, thank you.
Okay. I'll just leave these here. You'll have, hopefully you'll have some value. And what you guys are doing is a great thing. It's absolutely needed. So I'm an advocate for what's going on.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Just leave it there if you don't mind. Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else from the public? All right, so item number 3, this is the consideration to approve the March 27th meeting minutes. Everybody's, yep.
Are those numbers for the long-term replenishment program for MID? There was like 4 applicants, so 2,000 acre feet?
That's
Okay. For some reason I was thinking just 7,000, but it was 2,000? Okay. Thanks.
Anything else? Questions, comments on the minutes from the member agencies? Okay, I'll entertain a motion before we go to the public.
Second.
The first, make the motion, okay. Perfect. Motion by Jesse, second by Mike, thank you. All right, we'll go out for the public for public comments on the after we get public comment.
Oh,
yep. Thank you. Appreciate that. Get out of line. Gotta keep me in line here.
Yeah.
Public comment on the March 27th meeting minutes. Okay. Seeing none, hearing none. Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay. Item number 4. This is an MOU for the groundwater sustainability planning, reporting, studies, mutual aid, and support services. This was drafted by MID and it worked with TAC Planning Committee. So I looked through it a little bit, and so did Tim. You want to provide some detail on that, Jesse?
Sure. So the memorandum of understanding was drafted to provide an instrument for respective agencies that may have to go through internal authorizations to actually budget and expend that funding source. And so this MOU provides that instrument for Modesto or San Jose County, respective city agencies, Waterford, Oakdale Riverbank. So that it is a joint MOU with the understanding that at times, specifically, what we notice is the GSP required revisions, but there was nothing within our MOU that specifically, explicitly stated how that would be performed or managed or carried out. And so this MOU serves to be that instrument by which we bring to our respective boards, council, authorizing the designated representative to or agency to initiate a contract, and then we would have this set in place to establish a district or agency to seek out a consultant, take on a contract, and then issue payments on behalf of the GSA.
So this is on the agenda as an action item. If people need more time, then we can take more time. It doesn't necessarily need to occur today, but we can take action on it today if people are comfortable with that.
So Stanislaus County, we need more time for our legal to look at it. But our legal did mention the county is not agreeable to open-ended contracts. So I wonder if that's something maybe we could modify to coincide with the term of the GSP, or what you guys thought about that?
And the reason it was actually proposed with the term on it originally, but we also wanted to be fairly consistent, thought it could be fairly consistent with what the GSA MOU is, which doesn't have a term limit on it, so we didn't have to come back and keep renewing it. But it could end at any time. So we left it the same way. I think it's what the intent was, right?
But I think as the county's concerned that any consultant contract is not open-ended, there is a definitive time related to that scope. Is that what the concern or question is?
I can clarify with our legal, but I think the county just is not agreeable to open-ended contracts.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is to get contracts in place essentially. So that might be a way that when they hear that they'll understand it better and be able to come to some agreement on.
So we're looking
How to amend
for
that.
every agency to approve this document with your board.
Correct.
Well, we wouldn't really need independent approval specifically from the board or council. If you wanted to or needed to do that, you could do that. It would just be something we approve here
Okay, that's
at
what
the
I
GSA.
was a little concerned. I
Yeah.
didn't know if we were doing it as a board or if we were supposed to go
Yeah.
back to each of our individual.
Right.
councils.
Right. The GSP and the set of resolution we're talking about doing later is we're gonna have resolution from every single board. But in this case, we weren't expecting that needing to be
Okay, that's
Done.
what I needed to know. So I
Yeah.
don't have to. It's like.
Right. really up to you. Any other comments, questions on the MOU? Okay. Well, before we take action or any motion is made, why don't we get some public comment on it? We'll open it up to the public comment, to the public for comment on the MOU. Item number 4. Okay. So bring it back to member agencies. Do we want to take action today, or do we want to punt and just delay and wait to allow further review?
I can move forward today, we can wait for Stanislaus County to be get through their legal process. Is there any time considerations that we have to worry about here?
I mean, MID is okay. We need to take
Okay,
that.
yeah, it's really up to you because the
Okay.
first
Yeah, that's
contract's through you. Okay,
Bring it back next week.
all right, we'll bring it back. Yep. Why don't we get a formal motion and a second to take action on delaying it? You would. Is that okay? You want to make that
Yeah, I'll
formal
move to-
motion
I'll move to continue this to the next
meeting? Okay,
I'll second.
all right, thank you. We'll go out to the public one more time to give them a chance. Public comment, concern on the MOU and delaying that action. Okay, we'll proceed to a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Okay. Item number 5. So this is a discussion item. This is on the well and land subsidence impacts. In fact, we came out with a revised agenda just to include a couple more items on this discussion. And so yeah, water quality, interconnected surface water were also added to this discussion item. So this is going to be a presentation by Todd Groundwater. And I think Liz may be on to lead us through that conversation.
Yes, hi Eric. Yes, I'm not sure my camera is working. Are you able to see me? Can you hear me?
We can't see you. Your screen's
Okay,
blank,
but
black. We can
can
hear
you
you.
hear me? Okay, I'll just share my screen and get started. Please let me know if you're unable to see my screen in a second. Okay,
Yep.
You're able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great, okay. So thanks for having us today. Again, my name is Liz Elliott with Todd Groundwater. We are going to present on the work that we're doing to revise the GSP in response to DWR's determination letter that was received in January. So there are a number of things that we are going to talk about today. The first is well impacts analysis. And then we're going to talk about subsidence analysis, interconnected surface water analysis, water quality analysis, and then end with the well mitigation program. And I'll just say that I will be sharing this presentation with Chad Taylor and Iris Priesteff. And one quick request, I see that Iris is an attendee, but if she's able to be moved over to panelist, that would be great. I don't know if it's too late, but so to start out, I'm going to hand it off to Chad to talk about the well impacts analysis.
Thanks, Liz. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to walk us through the well impacts analysis that we've completed in response, as Liz mentioned, to one of the comments from DWR on the original GSP. And that specific comment was at the interim milestone, or IM, set in the GSP for 2027. Several wells were indicated to be lower than their minimum threshold, or MT. And DWR asked for some more information about potential impacts associated with that condition where water levels at the 2027 IM and select wells are lower than the defined minimum threshold. And that minimum threshold, as a reminder to everyone, is the quantitative metric for establishing undesirable results as it relates in this case to water levels within the basin. So what we wanted to know first was how many wells might go dry when we reach that condition. The approach that we took to doing this analysis was to first collect information on existing wells with known construction. We looked for both screened intervals and total depth. The most common piece of information we're able to identify is total depth. So that's the metric that we're really keyed in on here, and you'll see a lot in my discussion. And then relating these characteristics to the representative monitoring wells, the RMWs that were established in the GSP and have the MTs and IMs associated with them. And then evaluate what the effects of both the GSP minimum thresholds, MTs, and internal milestones, IMs, at 2027 could be on the existing wells for which we haven't. I'm going to walk you through in a series of maps and tables the components of this analysis, and then also the results of the analysis. Next slide, please. So first, where are the representative monitoring wells, or RMWs? They're located pretty widespread throughout the basin, covering as much of the basin as we practically could during GSP development. You can see here, each of the dots on this map is an RMW. Those that have intra-milestones that are deeper than the minimum threshold at 2027 are shown with a neon green halo. Notice that all of those, are in the eastern portion of the basin. Next slide. The next step was to collect information on existing wells. We looked at several sources for this data set. First was the data management system that was developed for the GSP, also called the DMS. And from that source, we got 82 wells with known construction information and good quality location data. We also looked at recent model updates that Woodard Curran has been completing in each annual report period. And they've also refined some well locations to give us better locations of those wells. And from that source, we had 162 wells with well construction information. By far the largest source of information, though, is from the Department of Water Resources online system for well completion reports, or OSCAR data set. And from that, we got over 4,300 wells with well construction information. Like I said, most of those are total depth. And a lot of them, as you can see, especially in the eastern portion of the basin, where you see wells at square grid nodes, are co-located wells at the centers of sections, because the location information from those wells is often uncertain. So there are a lot of wells in this data set that are located in common at those section centers. In total, though, we have good coverage throughout the basin, and we have over 4,500 wells with construction information. That's a very robust data set to work from. Next slide, please. We also wanted to see how the well information that we had, both our RMWs and the existing wells with construction, compared to wells that have been reported to have gone dry in the past. 159 wells were reported to the county as having gone dry in the period between 2014 and 2020 and 2017, in the drought that was happening during GSP, just prior to GSP preparation, during SGMA's process through the legislature, and so shortly thereafter. And that data set is represented by the X's here on this map, and it correlates quite well with both the RMWs and the existing wells with construction. We don't have a geographic discrepancy between these data sets. That makes us feel good. We can accurately represent the areas where wells are known to have gone dry in the past. Next slide. So our approach was to assign existing wells with construction to the nearest representative monitoring well within the same principal aquifer. As a reminder, in the western portion of the basin, where we have the Corcoran clay, which is the extents of which are denoted by a dashed line on this map, everything to the west of that has two principal aquifers, the western upper aquifer and the western lower aquifer. That area, we had both a geographic proximity and a depth or aquifer unit proximity question to solve when assigning the existing wells with construction to it, the correct RMW. And so you can see in that area, we've got a little bit of a confusion of colors in some areas. But really, this map is easier to understand when you look at the east, where you've got clusters of small dots surrounding a larger dot. Those small dots are the existing wells with construction, and they're colored the same as the RMW to which they are closest. And if you then look back to the east, you'll see the same geographic proximity with some distribution of shallower or deeper wells mixed in, and that represents the difference in the principal aquifers in that area. Next slide, please. So the next thing we did is to use those well groupings, those Thiessen polygon well groupings, where we're looking at the wells with construction, the existing wells with construction, closest to each representative monitoring well. And then we're saying at the minimum threshold, the quantitative value we established for defining undesirable results, how many wells close to each representative monitoring well would go dry? We sum them up. The red dots here represent wells that we think likely could have gone dry at the minimum threshold, which was a historical condition, roughly 2015, 2017 water levels, so historical water levels during that drought period. Going dry in this case means water levels go below the bottom of the depth of the well with construction, the existing well with construction, as defined by the water level at the minimum threshold in the closest RMW. When we do this analysis, we find that potentially 126 wells out of that 4,563 could have gone dry at the MT, this historical condition represented by the MT. That's a percentage-wise, that's 2.8% of the existing wells for which we have construction. That's not all the wells in the basin, and it's, may not represent accurately the active wells in the basin. But with the data set that we have, we see that we have a relatively small, although meaningful, number of wells going dry throughout the basin at the MT. Next slide, please. We then compared, using the same methodology, the water levels in the RMWs at the 2027 IM, where applicable, to the wells closest to them, the existing wells with construction closest to each of those RMWs. Once again, RMW with an IM 2027 below the MT. And we repeated that analysis, but we repeated it only for wells that did not go dry already at the MT. And the purpose of this was to see what additional wells might go dry if and when we achieve the IM, the interim milestone that we are projecting may occur in 2027. It's that difference that's important to us because we assume that the condition that we analyzed for in the MT analysis already occurred, and we're really looking at what might happen in addition to that at the IM. In that case, we have 29 additional wells going dry, which is 0.6 of all the wells with percent of all the wells with construction. A meaningful but relatively small number of wells, especially given the number of wells within the basin. Next slide, please. So you've seen most of these numbers already, but this also breaks it down between the principal aquifer units. In the table at the top, we have the total number of wells within each principal aquifer unit and basin-wide. We have the number of wells that exceeded the MT. That's the number that went dry when we achieved the MT in each of the aquifer units. So you can see that in that condition, there was only one that went dry in the western upper. The remainder of the wells that went dry at the MT were in the eastern portion of the basin, in the eastern principal aquifer. The next row on this table shows the number that went dry at the IM exceedance, and this is the total number, not the additional number first. And so you can see the additional, the increase in that value from 126 to 155, representing on the next line the total number of wells, the difference in the number of wells, excuse me, the additional wells that went dry at the IM. Importantly, here we see that the 29 wells that we think could go dry in the data set that we have are all located in the eastern principal aquifer. And then we have the percentage of wells with the MT and IM exceedances and the percentage of additional wells that could go dry. Like I said, it's 0.6% of the total and 0.9% of the wells in the eastern aquifer. I'm going to go on to the next slide. And we'll talk about the potential impacts at the IM by well type. This table shows both the impacts at the MT and the IM and the additional wells at the IM, just like the previous table. But here, instead of displaying them by principal aquifer unit, we're showing them by well type as indicated on the well completion report that was originally filed for the well. In this case, we see that most of the wells that go dry at the MT were domestic, although some were agricultural and some indicated as municipal. But of the new wells that go dry at the IM, the additional wells, all but 2 are domestic and only 2 are agricultural. So this is this additional impact at the IM primarily is indicated to affect domestic wells. And I will note that the designation of these wells, the well type, the use is, like I said, from the original well completion report, and we're not sure if that's still the use type for all of these wells. Next slide. We also looked at the age of the wells and their depth. And what we found when we looked at that is that most of the impacted wells are older. You can see here that the average age for those wells that went dry was 46 years versus 32 years for all wells. And that statistic bears out in both the MT and IM analysis. And as expected, most of the wells that go dry are shallower. This is a depth-based analysis, so that's not a surprise. Next slide, please. So a couple of limitations. I did mention one of these already, but they're important to consider when we're talking about the potential impacts that we've analyzed. So we only can evaluate those wells for which we have construction information. And so that's focused, this analysis is really focused on those wells. We also don't know where they are for certain, and we don't know their status. We don't know whether or not all of these wells are still active. We assume that some of them will have been retired over time, but that's not information that's available in the data sets that we've looked at. And we also assume that some of them are in locations that are incorrect in our analysis, and so they might not have the impacts that we anticipate. And I think now we're going to move on to some discussion of subsidence from Liz.
Thank you, Chad. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, do you mind? I think it'd be good to take some questions on each one of these topics,
Sure.
if that's okay. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, let's pause.
Interrupt your flow here. So well impacts is one of the most important things we need to discuss, as we'll see later in the agenda. So are there any questions so far from the member agencies on what you just heard? Well impacts analysis? No? Any questions, comments from the public on what we just heard about well impacts? Sure, sure. Just double check there's a green light on that. Perfect, thank you.
I was just wondering, so on the chart that identifies the domestic wells versus the municipal wells, I don't want to assume, I want to make sure, so the domestic wells I assume are individual wells at people's homes, and the municipal wells are that water being pumped for cities like Waterford. Is that correct?
That's our assumption. However, as I mentioned, this is information that was supplied by the driller in generally on the original well completion report. Many of these well completion reports are quite old, and so the information that is submitted by the driller may not always still be correct. But domestic wells do tend to stay domestic wells, and municipal wells tend to stay municipal wells. Agricultural wells, we've found over time, can shift their use, especially as areas that were agricultural become urbanized or have some change in land use.
So my other question is, can you just explain, I think we all know what the MTs are and what the IMs mean, Can you explain sort of, when we look at what the IMs will be, is that in 2027? And what's the difference between those two water levels, I guess, if there's a difference?
There is a difference. It varies by well. And so as I mentioned, if we can go back to that first map slide, Liz. Not all of the wells have an interim milestone in 2027 that is lower than the MT. The wells that are highlighted, haloed in green here, all do have an interim milestone that's a projected and estimated water level in 2027 that is lower than the MT for that same well. They vary. One well it might be 5 feet, and another well it might be more, but they all are slightly lower. And like I said, it's variable by well. The GSP has a series of tables that show each of the RMWs and indicates what the MT and the 2027 IM are. I can't remember the number of that table off the top of my head, but I'm sure Liz knows it.
Yes, it's in chapter 7, tables 7, 1, 2, 3, and I think 4 also.
All right, any other questions? All right, Liz, if you want to move on, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you, Chad.
Okay, so the next few things we're going to talk about are analyses that we did in response to DWR's question of, hey, you guys have said that you're going to lower groundwater levels to the 2027 IM. And we know in places that, like as Chad said, those 2027 IMs are below the MT value. Well, what effect might that have on other sustainability indicators? So to answer that question, we did an analysis on 3 different sustainability indicators: subsidence, interconnected surface water, and water quality. So I'm going to present our analysis of each of those, and I'm going to start with subsidence. So the goal of this analysis is to answer the question whether or not there's a significant land subsidence effect of lowering groundwater levels from the MT to the 2027 IM, where the 2027 is below the MT. And again, just as a reminder of what Chad had indicated, in the GSP, we defined 2027 IMs below the MT in the wells that were in the Oakdale Irrigation District and non-District East management areas. And it was out of recognition that water levels were declining in this area, and it would take some time for projects and management actions to have an effect on these water levels and therefore reverse the trend. And so that is how they were defined in those 2 areas. So for land subsidence, what does the GSP say? Well, it says very clearly that there have been really no known impacts from inelastic land subsidence in this subbasin. There are significant rates of land subsidence are not occurring. And we included a figure in the GSP, which I'll show you on the next slide, that has INSAR data, which is from DWR's website, that spans from June 2015 to October 2020, so about 5 years. This map shows that there's pretty much no land subsidence over most of the subbasin. There's a small area of subsidence within the Corcoran Clay extent in the northwest corner of the subbasin, and there's small amounts within the central and eastern subbasin. And that map is right here. The gray areas are showing no subsidence, whereas the light orange areas are showing some negative change or displacement in ground surface elevation or subsidence. It's a very, very minor amount. So again, subsidence has not been a big issue in the subbasin. But the GSP goes on to say that, hey, the western subbasin is considered to be the most susceptible to future land subsidence. And the reason for this is because it's underlain by the Corcoran Clay. We know throughout the Central Valley, especially the southern San Joaquin Valley, that Corcoran Clay is a key factor for subsidence. To the east of the Corcoran Clay in the eastern subbasin, we know that area is less susceptible because it's more consolidated and there are no known regional zones like the Corcoran Clay. But the GSP presents a strategy for minimizing subsidence in the Western Principal aquifers, and that is to maintain groundwater levels at or above historical low levels. So what did we do for the analysis? Well, we focused again on the representative monitoring wells with 2027 IMs that are below the MTs, which, as I said, are within the Oakdale Irrigation District and non-district east management areas in the eastern subbasin. These are within the eastern principal aquifer and far from the eastern edge of the Corcoran clay. So we know off the bat that, if we lower groundwater levels from the MT to the IM at these RMWs, we're not going to affect water levels at the Corcoran clay boundary because we're well east of that boundary. And we also know that there are no representative monitoring wells with 2027 IMs below the MTs within the Corcoran clay. So we're not going to affect the western upper or western lower principal aquifers. So the conclusion is that lowering groundwater elevations to the IMs will not result in groundwater elevations declining to below the top of the Corcoran clay. Therefore, it's unlikely that groundwater elevations at the 2027 IMs, where they're below the MT, will have a significant impact on land subsidence. And so before I move on to interconnected surface water, do you have any questions?
Questions on land subsidence from member agencies? No? Okay, any questions from the public on the land subsidence? Sure. Make sure the green light's on that. Here for me, if you don't mind. People on the phone are on.
No, that's
Thank you.
good.
Would you mind stating your name if you don't mind?
Connie Stevens, so Simmons and Dunn.
Thank you.
Liz, on the slide that talks about what the GSP says about subsidence, and it identifies a small area in the northwest corner of the western aquifer, and then talks about the vertical displacement in the central and eastern. It gives 0.24 inches a year and 0.36 inches a year. Can you explain kind of the significance or insignificance of those numbers compared to what you would see if it was a concern?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, this is over a 5-year period. We're talking a 1/4 inch in the very west and about 1/3 of an inch in the central and east. And just sort of as a kind of a context here, I think the margin of error is about 0.6 inches or something like that, about a little more than 1/2 inch. So to begin with, these measurements are within the margin of error of this technology, which is the INSAR satellite data. But let's just assume that it's accurate, 100% accurate. 0.24 inches per year is, compared to what is being seen further south in the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley, seeing 1/2 feet over the same time period or more. And so if you look at a map of the whole San Joaquin Valley, which we do have in our GSP, you can see the hot spots for subsidence are nowhere near Modesto. They're much further south, Kings, Tulare, Kern subbasins. So this is a minuscule amount, and we have actually talked with DWR about, and they have acknowledged that this is a very small amount. So so that's where we're at with this. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And then on the next slide, there's a bullet point that talks about the strategy for minimizing subsidence in the western principal aquifers, and that's maintaining groundwater levels at or above historical low levels. I'm just wondering if the last couple annual reports are showing that is indeed happening.
Yes, it is. In general, the wells in the western subbasin, water levels are above the minimum thresholds, and the minimum thresholds are the historical low levels. So yes, the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Just one question coming from a brain scientist. Where are your hubs? Because if you have an earthquake, it has a substantial impact on the elevation of the different hubs. How are you establishing that there in fact is a drop? Because if two hubs are impacted, they both drop a 1/4 inch equals 0. So how do you determine that?
Yeah, so this is, I mean, that's a good question, you know, this is based on satellite data, taken over, you know, I think every quarter they collect this data over the years. And yes, there's small, you know, like I said before, it's not 100% accurate. There is a measurement error. And so you know, there are changes, you know, natural changes to ground surface elevations caused by, you know, tilling the land, things like that, changing, you know, the cover of the soil. So things like that do happen. But overall, this captures sort of the major changes that are occurring over the Central Valley, and it's a data set that DWR publishes and they rely on, and they are going to be expecting subbasins throughout California to continue to rely on it in the future.
Well, thank you. I'm an old guy, so I've done surveying with hubs. But when you mentioned satellites, I was before that time. But that does answer my question. In fact, the satellites can do an analysis overall. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions related to land subsidence? All right.
Okay, I will move on to interconnected surface water. So the goal of this analysis was to ask the question, does lowering groundwater levels from the MT to the 2027 IM, where this 2027 IM is below the MT, have a significant effect on interconnected surface water? So what does the GSP say? Well, it says that all 3 rivers in the subbasin, the Tuolumne, Stanislaus, and San Joaquin, are interconnected with surface water. Groundwater occurs above the channel bottom, which is the invert, on an average basis, allowing groundwater to interact with surface water. The modeling that was done for GSP development indicates that groundwater and rivers remain connected throughout the 50-year implementation and planning horizon. If depletion increases more than the modeling indicates, groundwater could become disconnected. Projected increases in stream flow depletion result in a net loss of stream flow. Beneficial uses could be adversely impacted at predicted levels of stream flow depletion, even if groundwater and surface water remain connected. And projected stream flow depletions are considered to be undesirable results. The GSP also says and acknowledges that there's a data gap for the monitoring and management of interconnected surface water along the river boundaries. And the GSP includes a management action to improve this monitoring network by installing additional shallow monitoring wells along the rivers over time. So keep that in mind, that this is a data gap. So here's the methodology. Again, like with the land subsidence, we focused on the representative monitoring wells that have 2027 IMs that are below the NTs. And for this, we're focusing on the wells in the interconnected surface water monitoring network. Those are the wells that are along the 3 rivers in the interconnected surface water monitoring network. There are no representative monitoring wells that have 2027 IMs below MTs along the San Joaquin River. But there are 3 along the Stanislaus and 2 along the Tuolumne, and I'll show you a map of those in a second. What we did was we compared the MT and 2027 IM elevations to the nearest stream node invert elevation. The invert elevation is the elevation of the base of the river, or the fall weg. We evaluated the groundwater elevation change from the MT to the 2027 IM. And we also looked at the distance between the representative monitoring well and the river. So here's a map showing those 5 wells, 3 along the Stanislaus and 2 along the Tuolumne rivers, that have those 2027 IMs below the MTs. So this is the focus of our analysis, these 5 wells. This is a map of the stream node invert elevations. We got these stream node invert elevations from the C2V sim model. They're spaced approximately a ½ mile apart along the lengths of both the Tuolumne, I'm sorry, it should be Stanislaus and Tuolumne rivers. And this is sort of a summary of the information that we used. For each of these 5 wells, it includes the minimum threshold and interim milestone. It has the elevation of the nearest stream node, as well as the distance to the nearest stream node, and indicates whether or not the MT and the IM are above or below the stream node. And what this information shows is that the MT and the 2027 IM elevations are either both above or both below the stream node invert elevation, the nearest stream node invert elevation. There are, of these 5 RMWs, none of them have an MT elevation that's above this nearest stream node and an IM that's below the nearest stream node, which is good news because it means that going from the MT to the IM, you're not going to draw water levels from above the stream channel to below. So that's good news. Along the Stanislaus River, Marquee OID 10, one of the 3 wells, both the MT and 2027 IM are above the nearest stream node elevation. The other 2 wells are the MT and 2027 IM are both below the nearest stream node invert elevation. One of them is called Allen OID 1, and at that well, from the MT to the IM is about a 14-foot elevation change. But the well is over 7,000 feet from the Stanislaus River. The other well, Birnbaum, has about a 13-foot elevation change from the MT to the IM, and that's over a mile from the river. Along the Tuolumne, both the MT and 2027 IM are above the nearest stream node invert elevation at both of the RMWs. So to kind of summarize the results, there are 2 RMWs along the Stanislaus River where both the MT and IM are below the nearest stream node invert. But both of these are more than a mile from the river, and the difference between the MT and the IM at these 2 wells are 13 and 14 feet. So the question is, will lowering groundwater levels 13 or 14 feet, more than a mile from the Stanislaus River, significantly increase stream flow depletion? The answer is, it's uncertain. It really depends on river stage, and it depends on local hydrogeology. And again, a data gap really needs to be filled to help answer this question. So in conclusion, like I said, there are 2 wells along the Stanislaus that are more than a mile from the river, and they have MT and 2027 IM elevations that are below the nearest stream node invert elevation. It's unclear whether lowering groundwater levels 13 or 14 feet over a mile from the river will cause an undesirable result, which is increased stream flow depletion. But the GSP recognizes groundwater conditions along the river boundaries as a data gap. So we are consistent with what the GSP says. And before I move on to water quality, anybody have any questions?
So is there a concern that when we go back to DWR and we say that we analyze this sustainability indicator and we are uncertain, do you think that DWR is going to come back and deem the plan incomplete, or just say, yeah, you know, it's we understand there's a data gap and it's just something that you need to continue to recognize that you need to work on? But what are we expecting? Do we have any kind of indication of what their response is going to be?
I think we expect the latter. I think, you know, because we recognize it as a data gap and we're consistent with that, we expect kind of DWR to understand that. And also what's happening sort of bigger picture is that DWR is currently coming out with guidance documents for the interconnected surface water sustainability indicator. And they have publicly said, you know, they're not going to ding any of the subbasin GSPs for interconnected surface water until at least 2025, because they recognize that they are also still trying to figure this out and try to figure out the best path forward for interconnected surface water. So I think, you know, being upfront about what our data gap is and showing, you know, just providing the analysis that we just summarized, we think we're pretty confident that DWR will understand it and be okay with it.
Liz,
Yeah.
why are some of the MTs and IMs above and some are below the stream nodes.
Yeah, so the MTs and IMs were defined based on water levels observed at the wells. They were not defined based on the stream channel elevation. So it's completely independent of that. So it's based on the measured data at the well. The MT was defined as the historical low groundwater elevation during the GSP study period, which ranged from 1991 to 20, I think we went through to 2017 or 2019. And as Chad said before, in most cases, the minimum threshold elevation is the low elevation that was measured during 2015. There are some exceptions, but most of the time the MT was 2015. So the MTs and the IMs were defined independently of the stream channel elevation. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions from member agencies? No? Questions from the public?
Hi Liz, this is Ally Stevens again. I had a question. So the plan is just to tell DWR that we're recognizing that there's a data gap and more information is needed, but are you guys planning to explain how you're gonna fill that data gap, or are you just gonna say there's a data gap and we're gonna wait until we get the information?
Yeah, well, one way is, well, there's two answers to that question, two parts to that answer. One is that we are saying that we, the GSA recognizes the data gap and will, there is a management action to install more wells along the rivers, which will give us better data. So that's the first. And the second is we actually expect in these guidance documents that DWR is coming out with to have some more clarity about what they want in terms of how to monitor the sustainability indicator. What we have heard is that they might tie it to flows and depletions more than water levels in the future, but we'll have to wait and see and just see what they publish.
And you said that these guidance documents are coming out and you're not expecting DWR to ding anyone until 2025 on this issue, but that's like 9 months away. No, my math is wrong. I don't know. I don't do math, but it's not far away. So, I mean, we're going to turn this in July. And then maybe, 6 months later, DWR will come back and say, oh, no, this isn't good enough.
We don't expect that. We don't, I don't think no, we don't expect that. We don't know exactly what the timeline is. We know that they are behind with some of their guidance documents. They have started trickling out, but they have said that they're not going to hold, subbasins accountable for this and until 2025. So no, I don't think we do not expect them to use this to reject our revised plan solely based on this, if that happens.
Okay.
Yeah, and Liz, if I could jump in on this issue, sorry to interrupt you. It's not just a public statement, but the STRGBA legislation in water code, which is now in water code, prohibits the state board and DWR from putting any basin into probation solely in response to interconnected surface water prior to until after January 31st, 2025. So it's not a policy decision that they've made. It's a component of the STRGBA law.
Right. I mean, January 31, 2025 will be here.
Yeah, and it's specifically that date because it's meant to coincide with the periodic review timelines that DWR is required to achieve within STRGBA, and so it's associated with the periodic evaluations that GSAs will be doing. The first set of those will be for the critically overdrafted basins that are due January 31, 2025. For this basin, that periodic evaluation won't be due until January 31, 2027.
Okay. And then just my last question. I know the monitoring wells are far from the river, relatively far, but lowering groundwater levels 13 to 14 feet, that seems significant. Maybe what would you think would be significant enough to warrant it to be not an uncertain conclusion, maybe.
Well, it really depends on, I don't know the number. It depends on where you are. It depends on the groundwater gradients in the area. It depends on the hydrogeology. So there are a lot of factors that it depends on. So I don't know what number is significant, but over a mile away, I mean, gradients, there are gradients near the rivers. We don't have a firm understanding of all the gradients along the rivers because we don't have enough information. But because there are gradients, groundwater elevations change near rivers, right? So if you're over a mile away from a river, that elevation is not going to be the same as at the river. So again, it's a data gap. We need more information. But you know, the answer is it's uncertain.
And well, so and also to add that, I recall back when we were determining what our undesirable result definition was going to be, and getting back to 2015 levels, one of the considerations was stream flow interaction. And so one of the answers to that question would really be time period as well. If it's a short period of time, then there's probably not as much of an impact. Obviously, if it's a long period of time, then there might be substantial impacts, could be substantial impacts.
Like
So,
if they were continually going down that
Yeah.
much year.
never bringing it back up, because ultimately they're going to come back up, right? This is just for a temporary period of time. Yeah. Another thing, and that was, I liked her first question too. One thing I wanted to add is that probably in our GSP revision, wouldn't hurt to note that we did run through a data cap analysis for monitoring wells. And so we might want to mention that we haven't just ignored that. It's just one of those things that we haven't gotten to yet, but we did do an analysis to see where we would put wells if we had the funding to be able to do that. Any other questions?
Yes.
Travel.
Yeah, I was curious, how long would it take to figure out if we added 260,000 acre feet of surface water to irrigation of the general area and stopped pumping groundwater? How long would it take you to figure out the impact on the wells?
Is that question for me?
Well,
I-
anybody's capable, I guess.
I'm happy to jump in. I think it really depends on where you are. But I think that if you just stopped pumping, you would see, we monitor wells twice a year in compliance with SGMA and GSP implementation. And I think if you stopped pumping completely, you would start seeing changes immediately.
What's your name?
My name is Liz Elliott with Todd Groundwater.
Okay, Liz, I want to commend you because normally it takes 12 years. It took you 12 seconds. That's great. Thank you.
Any other public comment? All right, let's keep moving. Thank you, Liz.
Okay, well, moving on to water quality. Okay, so the water quality analysis.
Oh, I'm
similar to
sorry, Liz. I'm sorry, Liz. Let me hold it up real quick. We have somebody on. I don't see a hand up. Oh, there we go. We do have a hand up. Hillary, go ahead. Sorry about that.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So I was just wondering, are you guys visiting with DWR during this revision process and getting their input on the changes that you're planning on making?
We have met with them twice and we will likely meet with them again. So the short answer is yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Sorry about that, Liz. Go ahead.
It's okay. So similar to the other two analyses that I just went through, the goal of the water quality analysis is what are the potential impacts on the degradation of water quality sustainability indicator of lowering groundwater levels from the MTs to the 2027 IMs, where these 2027 IMs are below the MTs. In the GSP, there are 7 constituents of concern that are defined that have the highest potential to cause undesirable results. Those include nitrate, tetrachloroethene or PCE, 1,2,3-trichloropropane or TCP, arsenic, uranium, total dissolved solids, and dibromochloropropane, DBCP. So these are the focus of the water quality analyses that we've been doing every year for the annual report. And this is the focus, these are the focus of the analysis for the revised GSP. So what was our approach for this analysis? We downloaded all of the available water quality data in the subbasin for these 7 constituents of concern from the GAMA portal website. And GAMA is the Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment Program that's run by the State Water Resources Control Board. The analysis that we did is based on the GAMA data at wells with known well construction. We compared water levels at the representative monitoring wells to time concentration plots of constituents of concern at the 5 closest GAMA wells. So we actually produced time concentration plots for each one of these constituents of concern at all of the wells that we could find data for from GAMA that had construction information. So we had tons of plots. And we compared the screen interval depths between the representative monitoring wells and the GAMA wells because we wanted to compare water levels to water quality at similar depths within the aquifers. And we compared the trends. We looked at water levels in the RMS wells and the COC concentrations in the GAMA wells. And here's a map showing the GAMA data. So the blue dots that you're seeing is similar to the map that you saw earlier. These are the representative monitoring wells. The blue dots that have the green halos are the representative monitoring wells that have 2027 IMs that are below the MTs. And the pink triangles are the GAMA wells with construction. We have over 200 GAMA wells with construction that we base this analysis on. And we found that the GAMA wells, as you can see on the map, they're concentrated within the municipalities, which makes sense because it's the municipalities that have to report their water quality data to the state. Within the Western Principal Aquifers, most of the wells, most of the GAMA wells that we have information for in the Western Lower Principal Aquifer, not the Western Upper. And in the Eastern Principal Aquifer, as you can see, most of the wells are in the western region of the aquifer, kind of around the city of Modesto and Riverbank, and also along the rivers, Oakdale, Waterford. Many of the representative monitoring wells with 2027 IMs, which are in the eastern subbasin, are not near any GAMA wells. But we didn't just look at GAMA wells that are close to the RMWs. We looked at GAMA wells throughout the subbasin to see if we could see trends between water levels and concentrations. So what we saw, a clear relationship between the COC concentrations and groundwater levels at the representative monitoring wells was not apparent. For nitrate, at most of the GAMA wells, nitrate was the only constituent of concern with sufficient data. But there was no clear correlation between nitrate concentrations and groundwater levels. We saw increasing trends, decreasing trends, no trends. There was no clear correlation. For arsenic, there were several GAMA wells that had arsenic detections, but again, no clear trends. There were several wells in the Western Lower Principal Aquifer that had increasing uranium, TDS, and nitrate trends. But because we don't have much water level data in the Western Lower Principal Aquifer, we didn't have nearby representative monitoring wells with water level data. And so it kind of made this comparison impossible in the Western Lower Principal Aquifer. So we were kind of limited by the amount of water level data in the Western Lower. So the conclusion is that the absence of clear relationships between declining groundwater levels and COC concentrations suggests that lowering groundwater levels from the MTs to the 2027 IMs, where these 2027 IMs are below the MTs, should not affect the degradation of water quality sustainability indicator. Any questions?
Questions from the member agencies? Okay. Questions from the public on water quality?
was curious, considering biology breaks down nitrates and nitrites, et cetera. Is there any analysis on the concentration of bacteria and fungi, which does that work, break down those concentrations? Is there any analysis on that?
No, we did not, we did not look at that bacteria breakdown. We did not analyze bacteria. We just analyzed the constituents of concern.
Thank you.
Well, and we're not responsible for monitoring water quality. Like, as our responsibility is to ensure that our management of the aquifer is not impairing, impeding water quality, like moving blooms, for example, things like that. So we're not the entity actually doing the water quality monitoring.
Well, she was analyzing nitrates, which obviously.
Off somebody else's data. Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the clarity. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yep.
Yes.
I just
Do
have
you
one
mind
question.
stating your name for the record?
Oh,
Director?
Janice Keating from Modesto Irrigation District.
Thank you.
Having some experience with the city of Modesto and drinking water quality, either the State Water Quality Control Board or the DWR are continually changing their constituent levels that are allowable in water. So are we going to wind up in a situation where we're tracking this, and then when they change their requirements, we get caught in that trap on top of everything else it feels like we're caught into? That's my question.
That's a good question. You know, our minimum thresholds are the MCLs, the maximum contaminant levels. And so the question is, you know, if those MCLs change, does it change the way we analyze the data? I think that is something that if the MCLs change, it's something that we'll need to evaluate during our GSP of every 5 years, during our GSP periodic evaluations. But I don't have an answer for that now.
Short answer is yes. All agencies will get stuck with new regulations while they do. It continues to roll forward, right?
Yeah, the answer is a snake will be a snake. It will bite you. This information that you consent to give to the state, which you don't have to, that information will be used against you in a court of law.
Other comments on water quality? All right. So I think that actually concludes topic number 5. Item number 5. Part of the same presentation that you were handed out there, but is actually item number 6. So this is the well mitigation plan components. I believe Iris is going to help us out with this.
It would be my pleasure.
Thank you, Iris.
So I'm Iris Priestaff with Todd Groundwater, and building on the analyses that Chad described earlier, you know, we recognize that wells have gone dry as groundwater levels have declined, and as they continue to decline, more wells likely will go dry. So we are developing a well mitigation program, and at the recommendation of DWR to do this program, we thought that we would first of all look out and around to other GSAs and see what they're doing. So basically what we have now is a work in progress, and I compiled it from, you know, a half a dozen other plans where they've worked through a lot of details. My thought was to compile as comprehensive a plan as I can, to borrow the bright ideas from other agencies, put them in a plan, and then we can start working through it so it's most applicable to this subbasin. So what the well mitigation program does is that it describes how the GSAs can mitigate impacts to water supply wells that have failed due to declining groundwater levels caused by the overdraft. So we're looking at water supply wells, as Chad explained, most of those would likely be domestic wells because they tend to be shallow. So we wanted to look at, well, if we have a mitigation program, then what would we do? So we broke this up in terms of, well, short-term and long-term to be comprehensive and complete. Again, based on the advice of DWR, with whom we're working closely on this. So at the shortest term, temporary emergency well mitigation program could be delivery of bottled water, say to a household, or hooking them up with a water tank. On a slightly longer term, it might mean replacing a pump, setting the pump deeper in the well, well rehabilitation, or even well replacement might be called for. And then the longer term mitigation that we wanted to keep in mind is that we're already working on demand management and managed aquifer recharge in different areas across the basin. And we would expect as those halt the groundwater level declines, start to bring groundwater levels back up, that those would help in some ways to mitigate the potential for wells going dry. So those are the things that we thought in terms of this is what we can do. So the next slide starts to get into, well, how do we do it? And for preliminary planning, we were thinking in terms of it could be a memorandum of understanding or a resolution. And this resolution would be a legal document laid out, I would suggest, in some detail to show DWR, to show everyone we're serious about this, we've thought it through, but to use such a legal document for this preliminary planning. So just some of the things that would go into it, well, we're going to need a mitigation fund. And that would have to be set up based on funding sources that the agencies here would have to figure out. I think most important is a commitment to initial funding to have a well fund that could be used, say, in an emergency. Again, if we have another drought and wells start going dry, to tap into, and then also to provide for longer term funding. So that's a key issue. And then once we're funded, how do we do it? So we're proposing a program development committee that would develop and implement this program on behalf of the technical advisory committee. So there's a lot of decisions to be made. Like, when does the program begin? Again, we'll be able to tell DWR and everyone it will begin on such and such date. It will define the time period during which wells going dry are eligible for mitigation. So one of the things that we had discussed tentatively was, well, we will mitigate wells that have gone dry after January 31st, 2022, which is when you adopted the GSP. So that's not carved in stone, but gives you an idea of the decisions we're making, which goes on to the next slide. Once we decide, how do we fund it? Who is going to do it? It's going to be important to let the people in the community know that it exists. This could be flyers up in, city offices, or in the nearest grocery store, letting people know that the service is available and how they can put in an application for assistance. If we do an application that the well owner would need to do, we might need to have some assistance for them to provide information. Because clearly we need to evaluate what happened to their well. Did it really go dry because of declining groundwater levels, or are there other things going on with their private well? So now we're talking about developing a whole claim process. You know, which claims are going to be eligible for mitigation? What goes into the application? Well, clearly we need to know where the well is as much as we can about it, the well construction, other information, what it's used for. And then this information that would come from the application and potentially come from some field verification would be looked at by a technical review committee. That also needs to be set up. And then there's going to be a whole process of claims administration, review by the technical review committee, reporting, recommendations, and appeals process in case there's a dispute. And then later on, as we come to an agreement with the well owner, they will have to agree. For example, to allow access, to take care of their well, etc. And this would go along with mitigation. So that's basically where we are. We're developing the framework for this now. There's going to be an implementation schedule, and that will allow us to demonstrate to DWR and everyone that we're committed to getting this done. So I think that's about it. I'm happy to answer questions.
So one thing I want to just clarify a little bit, DWR has, through our conversations with them, have said that we need to have a firm commitment to implementing a well mitigation program and to developing and implementing management actions. So in getting this GSP approved, getting across the finish line, within the 180 days, we've had to have some discussions about this. So this is the extent and the level that we've gotten to so far as part of that ad hoc committee. We haven't made any decisions on this program, but we want to make sure that we're checking the box to get across that finish line. So, I mean, DWR would like as much information as we can provide, but they also know that we're not going to be able to have this program in place, develop it, have the funding for it, all of those things by the 180-day timeline. So these are all really what we're putting this on the agenda for, is to have some discussion, let everybody know these are all the things we need to think about. And we know that we need to, like Iris said, ultimately, I think the plan, at least from what we discussed so far, is to get another committee together to develop the program. And then part of the program likely get into having a committee that is more of a long-term management technical review committee when complaints start coming in, claims start coming in, and those things need to be processed. So thank you, Iris. That was
thank you.
Most beneficial. Are there any questions so far from the member agencies on this well mitigation program? Thoughts?
No question. There's my understanding of the flood shore. So I also sit on the GSA task for the Turlock subcommittee. So we had the same conversation. The idea is that this program will not be developed prior to adoption of GSP, but we have to be a sound commitment that we will achieve it by a certain date deadline.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to expand that the reason for that is it takes time for each of us to go back to our respective agencies and not only ask for approval for funding, but what does that amount, what does that commitment look like? And so that tends to take some time to develop what is that, what is our commitment going to look like, how long, what's the amount. So sorting out those details takes some time.
Yes.
Anything else from the member agencies? We're going out to public. Okay, public comment. The development of a well mitigation plan, the components.
So have there been any, I mean, this legal document that you guys are gonna be passing at your respective agencies going to get you to this program, but it's also a financial commitment without any no quantity. So everyone's okay with it? I mean,
We'll talk a little bit more about those two items at the end.
okay,
But yeah, if you don't mind, I'll wait to answer those
that's
questions.
fine, okay.
Yeah, definitely concerns.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bill Fogarty, Cattle Rancher, Eastern Stanislaus County. So I'm not in any of your jurisdictions except for you, Stanislaus County. So how do we in the incorporated area get our voices heard into the process?
By attending the meetings, reported to the meetings and voice your concerns and questions out there. We also have quarterly water advisory committee meetings. Stanislaus County hosts them, and we discuss all things water related with stakeholders representing all of the districts in the county. Our next meeting is going to be the 29th at the Farm Bureau at 9 a.m. I'd also encourage you to get in touch with me and give me your contact information for anybody who's interested, so we can add you to our distribution list and keep you informed of all the ongoings with all the GSAs and all the subbasins and provide other important information.
That's where I guess I have a problem with, because the meetings that you've had so far, it's county-wide. And being county-wide, then we're stuck listening to Turlock in the eastern Turlock on south of the Tuolumne River. And I don't see how they, in going to those meetings with all these different entities in there, I don't see where we're accomplishing it. So I guess it would be nice to make a separate committee for this groundwater basin. So then it would be limited to us over here, because we went over to one of the Turlock and they were talking about how they did the tax and everything. They got everybody all riled up and everything like that. And here over on our side, north of Tuolumne River, we haven't even got to that thing. And so I think you get mired in all this controversy, and it'd be better if we had our own separate little entity over here.
I think this is a good place for that entity. And you can always contact me anytime at the county department if you want to talk, or if you have information, or if you have any recommendations, or I can provide any assistance.
One other option, when we going back to this, we are thinking about and proposing for consideration at least, development of a program development committee specifically for the well mitigation. And those committees, we can have public members on those committees. It doesn't always have to be a technical committee or, ad hoc, just of the member agencies. So I think with the well mitigation plan and certainly with the management actions, I would expect that we definitely want to have public involvement, and that's one way to do it. So stay tuned, and we will definitely be informing the public in this venue of what kind of committees are formed as that process rolls along. The priority right now is getting that 180 days, satisfying the getting the GSP revised within the 180 days and committing to doing it. Yeah. Any other public comment? All right. Thank you, Iris.
Thank you.
I didn't miss anybody on the phone. Okay. All right. So that wraps up item number 6. Item number 7. So this is the GSP water balance review and a project and management actions overview. Again, similar to the well mitigation components, this is something we wanted to bring out to the public to try and get people thinking and engaged, and get some ideas moving forward on how we're going to get to where we need to be. So, Ali, I believe you're going to lead us through this discussion.
Yes, my pleasure to be here. Ali Tagavi with Woodard and Curran. Typically, my colleague Dominic Amador is here, but he's out, and so I'm supporting the group through this discussion. So with that, I've got a little agenda. We're going to be looking at quite a bit of stuff and quite a bit of numbers, and so I know it's almost about an hour and a half that everybody has been sitting and listening in. So I'll try to whiz through this as quickly as possible without boring you guys, but also I don't want to lose track of the important items that we all need to pay attention to, and eventually the discussion and the conclusion. So with that, we'll have a quick review of the regs and the action, corrective action, and then we'll dive into the sustainability approach for the basin and how we're planning to address DWR's corrective action comments. So you folks are pretty familiar with this, with the regulations, and so I'm not going to belabor reading all of the regs on this, but the GSA is required to come up with projects and management actions in order to make sure to have the basin in a sustainable and manage the basin in a sustainable manner. And so that's the topic of the conversation. What projects are we looking at? What management actions we need to be looking at to make sure that the basin is sustainable? We've looked at this in the past during the development of the original GSP. However, that didn't quite sink in well with DWR, and there was a reason for that, because there were some miscommunications. And so we want to make sure that as DWR looked at the GSP and reviewed, and they came up with this corrective action number 2, they commented basically that the GSA needs the tools to manage if the groundwater conditions are unsustainable and or if the projects do not perform as expected. We had a set of projects that we'll go over today. Those projects some of them are in the works, some of them are still to be implemented, and so DWR has a recommendation, or actually has a concern with respect to how these projects are going to be implemented. And so we're going to shift our conversation and the presentation of the projects and management actions in a way to show that management actions and demand reduction is going to be our primary role to guarantee the sustainability of the basin. But at the same time, we're going to have a significant number of projects that are going to be effective, and we have analyzed those. And those projects, when they are implemented, then they would take place of demand reduction, and there would hopefully be no need to make substantial demand reductions. All of those are going to be subject to uncertainties with respect to the operations of the basin, with respect to the hydrology and all of that, and with respect to the availability of the surface water that is the primary source of the projects. And so we're going to have to monitor the basin and be making corrective actions and be flexible to have the proper management actions in place in the event that the projects are not as effective as we have anticipated. So to that end, management actions are pretty much, looking at the groundwater monitoring program, extraction fees, possibly allocation programs, all of those are part of management actions. And on a parallel track, we have projects that we're looking at municipal water supply side, flood mitigation projects, and also in lieu projects. All of those get into the hopper and end up helping maintain the basin in a sustainable manner. So here's the bottom line, how DWR looked at the original GSP and where things didn't quite weren't quite communicated as well. So typically in a GSP, we have been providing information on the long-term average annual overdraft for the basin. And so for this basin here, it's about 44,000 acre-feet, give or take, based on all of the analysis that we did over a 50-year hydrologic period. That was put together, that was put forward, and then based on that, we promoted the projects that we have to meet those goals. At the same time, over the course of the past several years, since the GSP was submitted, there have been dry years, and so groundwater levels have been declining. And so as a result, we've exceeded some of the IMs, and so DWR is very much concerned whether or not we're going to be able to meet the sustainability goals. The 44,000 acre-feet ends up to be average of a long-term hydrologic period of about 50 years, of which about 33% is wet, and another 30% is critically dry, and some in between, above normal, below normal, and dry. And so these are the overdraft, these are the estimates of the overdraft for each one of the different year types. And so in a wet year, we expect the basin to actually recover to the tune of about 86,000 acre-feet. And in a critical year, our overdraft is going to be significantly more. And so we need to be adaptive to these different year type conditions and hydrologic conditions, and we need to be communicating and transparent to DWR as to how we're going to be managing the basin through the wet years and the wet cycles and the dry cycle, critical cycles, and anything in between as well. So to that end, the change in storage, for example, over the course of the past several years since 2016, has been, varying quite a bit. Back in 2016, we were still in a drought condition at about 67,000 acre-feet. Then we had the 2017 pretty wet year, and so we had a recovery actually. So the blue negative means recovery, and negative means negative overdraft. That is a positive actually. So it's a recovery. Again, in 2019 we had recovery. 2023 we had recovery. But anything in between, we also had declines in not only storage, but also groundwater levels. And so DWR has looked at all of those, has looked at hydrographs for these years here, and they were concerned whether or not, whether or not we're meeting the minimum thresholds and the IMs. And so again, we're going to be transparent and start showing all of the details of the analysis to DWR so that they can properly analyze the basin in the right context. So uncertainties are in place, and so the solutions we have to address DWR's concerns are to provide additional clarity and detail, prioritize the demand management over project and implementation of the projects, and of course, show the projects that help us attain sustainability. So to that end, let's talk about sustainable yield and the details of the sustainable yield. Of course, you folks have all seen these kind of maps before. We've broken down the basin into several areas. The areas that are in the Modesto ID and Oakdale ID and the non-district west area. They're pretty much, we've analyzed this before. We've shared it in the GSP and we've shared it in the previous presentations to you folks, that they're net contributors to the basin, and they're net extractors from the basin, which is typically the non-district east areas, but also the cities as well. And so collectively, we're going to be looking at all of these and making sure that we have the proper analysis for each area. When we look at the sustainable yield, that is a reduction of the demand in a way that we would continue having a balanced groundwater storage, but also making sure that the groundwater levels hover around reasonably the levels that we've currently had. So when we did the analysis, we looked at about a reduction of the demand of about 58% of reduction of overall ag area, which turns out to be about 15% reduction in total pumping. So under the historical condition, through 2015, we've estimated the total groundwater pumping for both the ag and the municipal usage to about 311,000 acre feet. Under the baseline condition, which is about 50-year average period that is representative of the hydrologic conditions of the past 50 years, we also ended up to estimate about 314,000 acre feet. In order to keep the basin balanced and in a sustainable condition with respect to the sustainability indicators that we've had, which is groundwater levels, groundwater storage, and then the ISW, which is interconnected surface water. Those are the three items we looked at. We need to reduce the demand by about 15%. So that means reduction of the groundwater pumping to the tune of about 260,000 acre feet. So what does that mean in terms of groundwater budget? Again, the pumping is going to reduce to 267,000 acre feet. What that means is reduction of about 47,000 acre feet of groundwater pumping total. And that would help basically bring the basin into balance with respect to, like I said, the ISW, interconnected surface water for Tuolumne River, San Joaquin River, and Stanislaus River. It would also help in terms of leveling the groundwater levels to a reasonable level based on what we've set as thresholds in the past for the long-term 50-year hydrologic period. These charts here, and I'm going to try to make sure I don't confuse anyone. These charts show annual over the course of the sustainability period, which is a 50-year hydrologic period. It shows the annual groundwater pumping and then annual contributions to the groundwater level. So anything in the gray below the zero line here is showing extractions and pumping from the groundwater basin. And anything that's above its contributions to the river, to the groundwater system from applied water, the percolation of applied water and rainfall, as well as anything that is contributed to the groundwater system as a result of conveyance of surface water through the canals and recharge, what we call basically a stream recharge or canal and reservoir recharge. And so as a result, when you look at the balance between the two, you see that under the baseline conditions, we have basically years that we are contributing to the groundwater basin, which is the positive. And then there are years that we're basically extracting more and there's net depletion from the groundwater system. So overall, when you add up all of these on a long-term average annual basis, we get about 47,000 acre feet of deficit. If we make this a little bit more complicated, I think you've seen these charts before. We're looking at a baseline condition and then what the sustainable scenario looks like. Again, this is a little bit more complicated because we're looking at the groundwater pumping as the gray bars here. And then we have the total recharge from any other sources. So the green is still deep percolation from applied water and rainfall. The purple is still sort of anything that is flowing, conveyance of the surface water through canals, and anything that's recharged through the Modesto Reservoir, in particular in this case here. But also we're looking at the light blue in here, which is seepage from the three major rivers, Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and San Joaquin into the groundwater system. So total recharge into the basin, total extraction from the basin. The net would be the orange, which is the deficit and or accretions to the storage. So when we look at that on a long-term cumulative basis, this line here, the solid line, shows primarily the change in storage on a cumulative basis. So if it is declining, that means the groundwater level is projected to decline under the baseline condition, and that ends up to be 47,000 acre feet on an average annual basis. That means the slope of this line here is 47,000. in order to bring it to sustainable condition, then we're going to have to reduce pumping. And so at the end of the 50 years, we're showing pretty balanced storage conditions. And so that is basically how we've analyzed the system under the baseline and under sustainability condition. So, so that was the management action, demand reduction. So, you know, when we have projects in place, when we have projects that are going to basically make up for any demand reduction, then we're hopeful that we don't need to go the demand reduction route, and we'll be able to implement these projects, get folks to subscribe and promote the projects on their land where there are ag lands that need to take water, and for the municipalities to implement the projects. So in the case of municipalities, we have the city of Modesto and city of Waterford. They've looked at basically 4 projects that they're either in the midst of implementation, such as this one here, the surface water treatment plant, or there are 3 other projects that are in the works in terms of design and eventual implementation. And so all of those are looked at under one scenario to see what is the implications and then what are the impacts of all of these municipal projects on the groundwater basin, and what's the effectiveness. And then we added some ag projects, and we call that scenario 2. The ag projects are both from MID and OID surface water supply for in lieu and also direct recharge to non-district east areas. We've talked about this many times in the past. It's no news to folks. And so those are sort of what we call group 2 projects. And those are also, they've been analyzed in the past, but they're going to be, they've been analyzed, and we're going to be looking at the effectiveness of these projects under this scenario 2 here. And then there are some flood mitigation projects that the county is looking at. And again, that's going to be under scenario 2. So we have analyzed all of these under scenario 2. We are fairly certain, if implemented properly and if the hydrology allows, with the proper climate conditions and all of that, these projects would make up for the demand reduction needs that we looked at earlier. So this is showing a map of where the projects are. I'm gonna gloss over this one here, and then the in lieu and the direct recharge location of the in lieu and the direct recharge projects. Overall, though, when we look at the scenario 2 in this case here, again, to reorient you folks, we're looking at the baseline conditions. Okay, and we're looking at the scenario 2, which is primarily the accumulation of all of the municipal projects and all of the ag projects in here. Those would all help to bring the operational yield to about 72,000 acre-feet a year, which would then help balance out the basin and bring the basin into sustainable condition. And so when we look at that, again, under scenario 2, we're going to have basically a basin which would be at about balance, I would say, minus 1,400. That means the basin is going to be recovering at that rate. But, from all practical standpoint, this is about 0. So with the projects in place, that is going to be equivalent to doing the total demand reduction of about 47,000 acre-feet. So we're hopeful that all of these projects would actually be scheduled to be in place in the long run within the implementation period, which is 20 years from 2022. So with that in mind, then those projects are all in place. This here is showing similar type of net recharge into the basin. And if you compare this to the one that I showed you earlier, there's a whole lot more fluctuation. In the dry years, we get a whole lot more deficit, but in the wet years, we get a whole lot more recovery. And that is because most of the projects are hovering around producing and delivering surface water from MID and OID during the wet years. So in the wet years, we have a whole lot more recovery in the basin. And in the dry years, we have more deficit. But over the long haul, again, we're going to be meeting the long-term objectives of sustainability in the basin. And so this is similar to the previous one that I showed you. Under the baseline condition, we still have the 47,000 acre-feet of decline. But with the projects under scenario 2, which is municipal and the ag projects, we're going to be hovering around 0 and then eventually balancing out over the long haul. Let's see. So what is the goal in here and how are we going to address DWR's concerns? So we're going to be presenting a commitment in the revised GSP that is going to highlight progress towards project implementation and a dedication to sustainability regardless of the hydrologic uncertainty and or project timelines and outcomes. So DWR wants to make sure that there is a backstop, but they want to make sure that the projects are going to be in place. But if the projects are not in place, demand reduction is on the table, and folks make that commitment. And so we're going to develop and prioritize robust management actions, such as the demand management and demand reduction, that could be readily implemented as needed along with existing projects to ensure that the basin is sustainable regardless of the hydrologic year type. So commitment is a key word that DWR is looking for. How that commitment is going to take place, we need to talk about that, provide details and clarify what that demand reduction is and how the projects are going to be put in place. We're working with the entities who have promoted the projects to make sure the project descriptions are properly represented. The schedules are there as to when those projects are going to be implemented, along with the funding sources and so on and so forth. So all of those details are going to be in the revised GSP for DWR to be looking at. And so if we do have another opportunity to check in with DWR, we'll make sure that we run those by DWR as well. With that in mind, then along with demand reduction, and if God forbid we have to go that route with respect to the demand reduction, the question is who is going to be reducing pumping and by how much and at what cost. And so what that's called is basically groundwater allocation. We have certain deficit, allocate the deficit to various parties and make sure that that folks are properly subscribing to that allocation process. So we have a framework, not too different from the well mitigation program that Iris presented. This is also a framework. Nothing is carved in stone at this stage. It's just for all of us to basically have a framework to be thinking about it. And then eventually down the road, if we get to a point that we need to have demand reduction, actually, then we need to hash this out in a whole lot more detail to make sure that folks are all agreeing to the details of it. But an allocation framework basically is an accounting of who is responsible to do what actions in terms of reducing the groundwater pumping. And so there's exemptions to some of the folks. For example, federal and the de minimis users are exempt. And then there are, the local refinements and those who have developed supplies, those also need to be addressed separately, because that's going to be part of the what's called the native water. But then in terms of actual allocation, there are going to be overlying users versus appropriative users who are going to be responsible to take the proper action to reduce pumping. And then eventually we need to work through establishment of a framework. So with that in mind, if we have to go that route, we have about 260,000+ acre-feet of yield that we need to allocate amongst the various parties. And so that's what's been estimated. By the time we get to this point, hopefully we don't even need to be looking at it, but we may have to come up with a updated number based on the hydrology through the year that we're going to be looking at this. But give or take about 270,000 acre feet has been a reasonable amount of yield to be looking at for any allocation process. So typically you go through allocating the 267,000 and you take the exempt users out, you take the developed supply out, which would be some X acre feet to be estimated down the road, and then eventually whatever is left out of the 267,000 needs to be allocated properly amongst the overlying users, and then the appropriate users as we move down that path. Again, this is just a framework. We haven't hashed out anything in detail. There have been other GSAs who have gone down the path, and we're going to have examples from those folks to be brought in to look at, review, and see if those make sense for us here in this basin here. Like I said, not too different from what Iris did on the water, on the well mitigation program. We need to do some research from from other basins to see who is looking at what and what sort of lessons learned we have from all these other basins who have gone through or are currently going through some allocation process. So the last step on this would be to identify and outline the program variables in terms of yield that's available, accounting of the imported water supplies, establishment of historical period that we'd be looking at for the appropriate users, and also, active versus dormant allocation, and then eventually design the adaptive management policies that would support the allocation process. So with that, that's all I have, Eric. I'll be happy to address any questions that may be out there.
Thanks, Ali. Some couple comments here just to make sure it's clear. So when we did the model, when we modeled those projects, we haven't rerun the model. We basically confirmed that everything we originally ran was correct. And when we did that, and the reason we did that is because, and I'm paraphrasing, DWR came back and said, we don't see that your numbers add up, essentially. And we didn't, they didn't completely understand how we got to that conclusion that projects would work, correct, Ali? I mean, that's pretty much what they said.
That is correct, yes.
So we've gone back and we've determined that, yes, the numbers we used are correct. Everything does pan out the way that we thought it would pan out. However, with the caveat that projects were also modeled as being a certain number and quantified a certain volume, right? Those, and above and beyond that, they were also assumed to be implemented on day one, and we're now 2 years plus past that point. So we're starting from behind at this point. If the projects were all in place today at the quantities that we said they were going to be in place, then we're already 2 years behind. So that's one of the things that DWR said and has made clear in our conversations, is that they don't want us to drop below those 2027 IMs. And so it's not a matter of if we're going to do demand management actions, it's a matter of when and how. And so that's what we need to figure out. They're not going to give us any leeway, and they're not going to approve our plan or GSP without saying that we're going to commit to doing those. You agree with that, Ali?
Yeah, that's well said, Eric. Yes, the demand reduction needs to be on the table. There needs to be commitments and also pathways as to when and how we're going to implement those, because projects are going to take time to kick in. Correct.
Now, we could do demand management actions initially, or be ready to go, and all of a sudden we could have, rain, cats, and dogs, and all of a sudden we're having great water years back to back to back, and all of a sudden we're not going to reach those levels, or projects kick in and then we're generating more water we thought. It's unlikely to occur, I believe. And so they want us to plan to have a backstop, and that backstop is going to be management action. So we've projects to the supply side, demand management actions are demand reduction. So we need to figure out what those actions are going to be. So we're ready to implement them to prevent us from going below the 2027 IMs. Okay, with that, questions on what Ali presented, questions, comments from the member agencies? Yep, Christy.
I know that Ollie, you were just kind of giving us an example allocation framework just to get us to start thinking. But since we're thinking about it, I wonder if you could explain why what the benefit would be to, instead of having like a single allocation, why would we consider having what is it called? A different allocation for overlying users, the appropriative users? Could you help me understand that?
So the overlying users and appropriate users, that is basically the municipalities versus the ag folks. And so, like I said, once we have the exempt users and those who have developed supplies, which is the districts who have already developed supplies are excluded, then we need to be looking at the ag folks who are overliers and have overlying rights versus appropriative in terms of who is going to be doing what and at what rate, so to speak. So it could be all in one bucket if that's what folks want to look at, but typically municipalities have taken a different route than the ag folks in terms of reduction, just because of the timing, because of the criticality of the need to have and to meet municipal supplies for drinking water and so on, human rights to water and all of that. Those all would come into the picture as you look at them, and so it's best to keep the factors separately. Again, at the end of the day, if there's a need to be blending them together, that's a decision to be made. But it's good to be looking at them differently initially.
Thank you.
Anything else from the member agencies on this? Okay, take it out to the public for comment.
William Fogarty, cattle rancher. I'm an overlying user and I'm not a member of any irrigation district. So in my case, I have about 215 acres of irrigated pasture. And so my annual use when I pump is about 800 acre feet, somewhere about in that area, maybe a little less. So I think one way that you could get the state off everybody's back for a little bit is we have maps that show where all the irrigated ground is on this thing. And so you go and put a lock on anybody developing any more ground. And you say, this is how much acreage we have out. And so then you figure out with the amount of water he's talking about that will sustain it, allocate that to the overlying groundwater users that are in that eastern basin mainly. And then you say, this is what, with your acreage that we know you have, this is the amount of water you can use. And you can tell that to the state. If we can't develop all these additional water, then that's what we're going to make happen right now. But you have to figure out what that acreage is. And so people don't start playing games and adding more pumped water into development. And I think if you do that, then the guys that can't get, they're up above all your projects, and it's going to be really prohibitive expense to pump the water up and pay the $200 an acre foot, which most people are talking about. Then those people, women and guys, then they have to say, I'm going to dry up some of my ground, and then they live with it, and then they're not. That should make the state, I think. We have a plan right now.
Thank you.
I'm always prepared to. Sorry, Stanislaus. Chair.
Is the microphone? Sorry, Jennifer's telling me can't hear you.
It's great.
Is it?
I'm just old.
Oh, okay. She said maybe you're talking a little low.
Gotcha. My name's Louis Burkett Jr. and I'm representing the Stanislaus Mutual Water Company. I'm the current chair. I had a question about this slide, the sustainable yield slide. It's more towards the front end of the slideshow.
Which slide is that, sir?
It's
Right, you passed it.
water users, group 1, net contributors.
Right there.
Oh, there you go.
One back.
One? This
Right
one?
Yep.
Yeah, so it appears that the sustainable yield calculations are not based on the 4 management areas, but are instead based on delivery areas, including the out of sub-basin Oakdale Irrigation District North. Is that true?
So the sustainable yield is based on, the sustainable yield calculation is based on reduction of the demand in areas that are net extractors at this point of the basin. So those, the contribution, the water supply and the demand calculations have been done on each one of the areas. And so we've identified that over the long haul historical period, the group 1 folks are net contributors to the basin and group 2 folks are net extractors from the basin. And so the sustainable yield calculation is done on the net extractors areas, correct? If that's what the question is.
That's kind of what I'm asking, but part of it is why is Oakdale ID North included? Because it's not in this sub-basin.
Oakdale ID North?
Yeah, everything north of the river is shown on the map. It's
Yeah.
not. Go ahead, Ollie.
Yeah, that's not part of this basin, North Oakdale ID North.
Right. So the bottom line is it's not included in the analysis and in the model. It's
Correct.
included as a boundary flow. I mean, we have the information from OID North, and as far as boundary flow concerns and modeling goes in, but as far as the numbers to net contributor, net extractor, OID North is not part of those numbers, correct?
That is correct, yes.
That answer your question?
Yes, that answers my question. I have an additional question. I had Eric and Liz send me some information from the meeting on March 13th of 2024, the annual 2023 annual report draft results. And during that meeting, there were these operational water budgets. You can see on the chart labeled net recharge, Modesto area, there are a lot of net recharges that are negative in current years, or these most recent years, right? And you see a different story in the Oakdale area management. It's mostly positive on net negative or on net recharge. Now it's kind of harder to see it on this one, but the non-district west management area also has net negative recharging. And the same goes for the non-district east area. And
I think you're looking at the net recharge at the very end is just that 1 year, but not over.
No, but I'm talking about the whole graphical term, which is
okay.
what I had you send me.
Yeah, the information.
The numeric information, right? So my point is that this slide kind of looks like a red herring to me, because I think we should be looking at this sustainable yield based on management areas. Because when you look at this data, which corresponds with these graphs, you see on average over the 33-year period that there are 3 out of 4 management areas that have an average net negative recharge across the board. So for the Modesto area, it's negative 25,000 acre-feet net recharge. On the non-district west area, it's negative 200. And on the non-district east area, it's negative 32,000. All of these areas have negative net recharges on their water operational budget on average. Which is why I think all of these management practices that you guys are planning to put in place should be treated as a basin-wide operation. It shouldn't be singled out that non-district east, who has a similar net negative recharge as the Modesto management area, shouldn't be penalized more than the Modesto area. Those three management areas represent 80% of the ground area of the basin. The land area.
Yeah, we would have to look at that data you're interpreting, because I think exactly what he's got here is telling a different story. So I'm not sure if how you're analyzing the data or if you're looking at something different. But again, if it goes back, if it pertains to this, we can talk about it.
Would you like to look at it right now and let
We
me know?
maybe we should talk. Yeah, we could talk about it after the meeting. I don't want to delay
Because
the
I
public.
had it explicitly says on the data you gave me, the average over the last 33 years of these net recharge.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking you're
No,
might be
because-
interpreting it differently, but I don't want to take time out of all the public to interpret the data we had last meeting. We can talk about it after the meeting, be more
Yeah.
productive to make sure that we're not misinterpreting the data.
Okay.
But I appreciate that. And I appreciate the whole basin approach comment. We've heard that before. We hear you again. We'll take that into consideration. Anybody else?
Maybe.
Go ahead.
I have to agree with Bill. I think everybody ought to cut back 20%, which will probably impact their income about 40%. And to augment that loss, maybe all the state and county employees can donate 30 or 40% of their income, and then we can use that money for projects to increase surface water. Thank you. Can I get her
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm understanding there's a paradigm shift that's being required by DWR from the focus on in the previous GSP was on projects to solve the overdraft. Now they want demand management to be pumped first. And I understand that there's going to be some time to develop what that looks like, but I mean, there is a timeline, I'm assuming, associated with that. So when would those things go into place? And how long do you think it's going to take before they're developed and ready to kind of roll out?
And that's a great question. One of the things we're going to talk about on the next item is going to be what we have to tell DWR and commit to. So we haven't answered that question. It's a great question. I think we all have the same question that needs to be discussed.
Okay, and then so maybe another question, maybe it's appropriate time for is the 267,000 acre feet sustainable yield. Has there been any discussion about allocating that to the different management areas and doing demand management per management area, or are you thinking that demand management allocation program is going to be a basic body?
I think people have thought it, but there hasn't been official discussion on it. Something we need to figure.
Okay.
Another good question. Thank you. Any other questions or comments on this before we move on? All right, thank you. Will be fun conversations to have moving forward. Thank you very much, Ali.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 8. So management actions, commitment, resolution, SMU components and schedule. Just 2 slides put together for this. I'll lead this discussion. It should be short and sweet. So the deficiency number 2 from DWR, we need a feasible path to achieve sustainability. They said that projects, they look great on paper. In fact, they didn't agree with it on paper. we proved that it would work if it panned out exactly as we proposed it to, but we're already behind a little bit. So they want to make sure there's a backstop, and they want to make sure that when we go below the minimum thresholds down to the inner milestones in places where they are different, that we are going to mitigate those impacts and we're not going to drop below those levels. So what the DWR has asked is that we get an MOU or a resolution together to submit with the GSP, committing to the development of a well mitigation plan and to management actions within the subbasin. We don't need to define what those management actions are. We don't need to have all, the whole policy and program laid out, but we do need to have that, make that commitment. So what we're proposing in the last two bullets on this first slide, they've actually changed since we put the slide out. Our approach, I think, is going to be a little different than that. What we're proposing is that to make this easy on everybody, given the timeline, is we're proposing, and this was Emily's idea, and she's working on it. So when we adopt the GSP, we are going to each one of our agencies and having our own resolution. It's essentially the same resolution with your own agency written in. So within those resolutions, we're proposing to not only adopt the GSP and authorize the council member here or the member, us, to authorize it and approve it at the STRGBA meeting and submit it, but also to commit to the management actions and the well mitigation program. Above and beyond that, so it'll be the same meeting, same process. You won't have to change that. The resolution will just change slightly. And you'll want to obviously inform your board and your council, border councils, that is something we're doing as part of that action. So the next slide, the resolution will show firm commitment before water levels reach 2027 IMs to develop and implement the well mitigation plan and the management actions. One thing that they would like to see is a funding source, or at least a commitment to a funding amount. And they don't necessarily care where the funding source is, as long as you have somebody who's going to be able to get that funding done and put in place before the program is implemented. We talked earlier in this meeting about 29 wells through our well analysis going dry potentially if they were all active, still continue to be active. 29 wells, additional wells going dry between the MTs and the IMs. If you do quick math, assuming that each well is roughly $20,000, each well that they talked about is nearly or at or exceeding half its life span. They're all about 40. I think the average life was 45 years. Wells, a lot of the people use a well number of 50 years. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt, say it's 90 years. We're halfway there. So if we put money into account to at least have money available when these claims came forward, if these 29 wells in fact went dry, you said 50% compensation for the 29 wells, assuming $20,000 a well, that's roughly $300,000. So we're thinking maybe $300,000 might be a good number to commit to. Implementation deadline and threshold. So I think it's more the deadline is the important part. We thought that January 31st, 2026, a year and a half out from now, essentially, is a good time period for us to be able to develop this program and have the funding in place. We'd be able to go through the budget process this year and potentially next year and be able to split it in half, generate 150 this year and then another 150 the following years, that we would have it in place by the time the implementation occurred, if the implementation date was January 31st, 2026. So those are all things to just discuss as part of this item. Management action, same thing. We need to have demand reduction measures put in place. Below this on the slide, we've got a number of management actions that we propose should we need to get there in the GSP. Those bullets are all of those management actions we propose to consider. They don't have to be limited to those. We don't have to do all of them, but we're proposing in the resolution to at least list those as things that we would consider as part of the management action program. Funding is something we need to figure out. I don't know if we're going to get to a funding amount that we're going to commit to. Certainly not a source. Again, when thinking about funding, it could be something that for the well mitigation program, for example, the agencies come up with the money initially, and then as the program proceeds, we could have that reimbursed by whoever we determine is responsible for funding that. Let's say the non-district, for example, the non-district east, we have a well in OID that goes dry, and we find that, you know, the over pumping in the non-district east is the cause. Then maybe the 300,000 is there to immediately get that well put back in place and compensate these people. But over time, we figure out that's who's responsible, and maybe the non-district east is the one who funds that portion of that claim. It's just an example. I don't know that that's going to happen, but it's a thought. At least that would allow us, if we couldn't get the funding mechanism, source, all of that figured out, we had to go through 218 processes, that sort of thing, then we would have the funding available and we would be able to implement the program. So just an idea. Same sort of thing could happen for management actions theoretically. We need to have an implementation deadline to prevent things from getting worse in 2027. The latest we would want to have that in place is January 31st, 2027. So we could push it from 2026 noted on the slide to 2027. I'm not sure how DWR would react to that. And I think these are just things I want to discuss at this meeting, get some feedback from people, and ideas from the public member agencies before we put this resolution out for everybody to chew on and provide feedback on. So that's all I have. So with that, member agencies, questions, comments on any of that?
I do have a quick question. It says here on the second bullet, resolutions provided to by the member with the next GSA meeting. That's going to be prior if it goes to our council. Our council was taking action on the 20th. So it sounds like you're asking for the resolution to include the authority for me to make that decision. Is that what? As far as
so we're not going to have to come to this. We're not going to have to come to that 6/12 meeting is actually going to push to our July 10th meeting, I think it is.
And the other side is, I don't know how other member agencies feel, but having a open checkbook is not something most agencies want to see.
Right.
And when you don't have a dollar amount or a budget amount that we're committing to, we're just saying we're committing to the process. It sometimes, budget wise, councils are not going to say, hey, let's go ahead and approve it. So maybe you want to see some dollar amount. In my opinion, you need to have some sort of initial budget that maybe has to go back after the fact for some sort of modification, but something that they can say, okay, City of Waterford's only looking at $50,000 to put this budget together for this type of activity or well mitigation. So that's just kind of how my feeling on it. I don't know how Cecil's County or other agencies would feel about an open checkbook, but I don't think see that.
Yeah, I think the hard part for us was, so well mitigation plan, certainly, I think that number, we should come up with a number and it would help DWR satisfy, it would help satisfy DWR's concerns. So I mean, you have any thoughts on the $300,000 number?
When you're saying 300,000, shared equally 5 agencies or something?
7, and actually 8 if Tuolumne's part of that, right?
So I think, I personally think that's fine from my perspective. They have 1/8 of that. But I just need to know what that number is. So my council says, and part of my synopsis, I have to say what the budget, potential budget ramifications are.
And it's really an up to number, right? Because we don't know that that's ultimately going to come from the agencies or funded some other way. But at least we would know that if we had a commitment to put that amount of money aside, if we got to the point where we had to do it to implement the program by the time that we said we were going to implement it, was going to be implemented. Yeah, no, that makes sense. The demand management actions side of it is going to be really difficult to put a number to. But I think the well mitigation plan we can commit.
I thought was really had to do with more mitigation. That my biggest concern was we're talking. What was that? 29 additional wells on top of the 100 and whatever wells. So
the other wells the 100 and something those are all wells that would have gone dry in 2015 by 2015 according to the data. So the above and beyond that is what we're talking about. So the 29 is what we're talking about. And I had that same concern when I saw that presentation initially. I almost fell over. So yeah,
So if that's 29 wells that could potentially go dry, if the water levels drop to the IMs, right?
yes.
Is there a way we could like break that up by like potential wells that may go dry or could likely go dry each year? Instead of putting together a fund to fund all of them, maybe like a fund that we can fund them over maybe the beginning years since we get a better handle on it.
Yeah, I think the problem is you're gonna have, if those IMs occur in 2027, as we're saying occur, then all 29 of those are gonna be needed to be mitigated and replaced by 2027.
I think what Chris is saying is it's not gonna happen in 1 year, so.
Right.
The ones that are closest to going dry, we account for in year 1, and you slowly build the pot up over something.
Right. Well, and that's why I kind of threw out that funding, we need time to be able to put the funding, generate the funding. Hopefully we're going to generate, might not be from the agencies, might be from some other source. How we figure that out will be determined over time, right? So by the time we get there, this is going to be a year and a half from now. We'll be able to budget in July, typically July, August is our kind of our budget time period for next year, which we collect January 2025. Then we come back in August, September 2025, and we budget for 2026. So this might be something that we don't generate for another 2 budget cycles, essentially.
Yeah, so I'm saying my budget's already set, so.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
start in July,
Uh-huh.
and so, we're looking at, basically a budget modification if we have. So,
Yeah. Yeah. No, we wouldn't. I'm not proposing to do that. And again, this program, Iris threw out that we had talked about, we need to figure out how far back we're mitigating for wells. We could go back all the way to 2015, but the discussions we've had so far are why would we be responsible for something before the GSP even went into place? And so up to this point, it's been let's start on January 31st, 2022, and anything that's beyond that. And they could potentially come back. I think there's a 6-month time period that they could come back and put in a claim for a well that they've already replaced to get reimbursed for those costs for up to the specifications in the program, So
And then the resolution itself is being drafted, so you can share that with the agency.
that's the plan, yes. We wanted to get this feedback and then
I would share that and kind of a rough synopsis, so that we all have kind of the same information. from
Yeah.
each work council.
Yep.
That way we just. One voice.
Yep, and we might, so we can't share it outside of this meeting, so we'll end up in the public at the same time. So what we would probably likely do is get it to a draft point that the committee, the ad hoc committee is comfortable with, and then maybe even have a special meeting before. It could be at this June 7th meeting, or it could be a special meeting between now and then, depending on how fast that moves. We're able to get that rolling, because I know that I think you're first,
Yeah,
Mike.
that's the way.
Yeah, so just if there is something that people aren't comfortable with, we want to know. Once you see it, we're gonna have to have some feedback if there's anything that we really want to come back and change before we present it to our councils
So we said
and
the agenda
boards.
is ahead. So.
Yeah,
We're approaching that. So.
yep, we're close to getting something together here, so that would be our intent.
Does that include the cost of investigating the claims and destroying the old ones?
We'll have to figure that out. I don't, that's probably going to be part of the program development as well. What all is compensated? I think it's just that they want to know that we have an amount to fund something. If claim were to occur, you've already got some money set aside, is kind of what we've been told by DWR up to this point. The Basin of the North, they're proposing to put aside $200,000, but they have less wells that they show through their modeling going dry in that period of time. So, anything else? Trustee?
No, I think your suggestion is, I think your suggestion is logical. Breaking it up, starting at that, that's a good start point, based off those 29 wells, so at least it's substantiated by that. I think that's subject to going back to our board and getting their opinion on it.
Yep. Anybody else? Okay, let's open it up to the public then.
Well, considering that we the people are tired of paying the bills. In Sacramento, they don't make decisions. They don't make good decisions. They're inept. And we the people need to go and step and point their finger and punch them in the chest and say it's your fault that we're in the position. For 40 years, you guys have been digging around. You must supply us with more surface water, period. That's it. I would like you to add that onto your plan. And in fact, I would demand, as we the people, I would demand that you do that. Respectfully, of course.
Thank you.
So I had a question about correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the GSP says that when more than 33% of the monitoring wells drop below the MT, that triggers management actions. Is that correct?
Undesirable results.
I'm sorry, undesirable.
Yeah.
So, so what does it say about when management actions do get triggered? Does it say now?
The GSP doesn't say anything about implementing management actions. We're going to only do supply side projects.
So that's what I'm going. So is anything changing in the rewrite of the GSP that specifies when these management actions will happen?
The only thing that will change or is proposed to change at this point is committing to developing those management actions and implementing and developing a well mitigation plan. And that'll be through the resolution, same resolution that we're going to adopt the GSP. And it'll just, that'll be an attachment to GSP. But the GSP text itself won't, I wouldn't think is going to say a whole lot about it. May have a little bit in there.
And then I know that when the vision of the GSP is about to be adopted, it'll be released to the public, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've done this before on sub-basins, and I know what it is. So I just was wondering, is there an opportunity for the chapters as they're written to be released to the public so we have a chance to read them?
It's a really tight turnaround. I think for, the 5-year update, we would hope to do something like that. For this, it's going to be red line. So it's not going to be as much of a heavy lift to review those revisions.
Okay.
Our plan right now is to release the amended GSP to the public and all of the agencies together on the 7th of June.
Okay.
So not that far out.
No.
Yeah.
And that gives time. It's not due till the 16th of July, right?
Yeah, we're going to adopt it here. We plan to adopt it here at our July 10th meeting. And we're going to our councils before that. So we would hope to have some revisions and everything before we get to that point. We'll probably end up having to, like we did last time, we'll adopt a draft contingent upon, no substantive changes occurring.
Okay. And the only thing I was going to ask is, we would really love it if there was a stakeholder to be more involved instead of having to come here, because we know from doing this, all of us know there's a lot of devil in the details. These presentations are great. They give a lot of information, but it would be really helpful if there's a stakeholder where we could times these things and talk about them. Chance to do it. This is, again, these presentations are really thorough and they're great, but as we know, there's a lot of behind it, a lot of questions.
Right.
So request.
Yep. No, absolutely. And this is one of the things we're trying to get this done now.
Yes.
To the commitment at least, and get it, get across the finish line at least for the next couple of years. But as we develop them, hopefully these deadlines will give us the year and a half, whatever it ends up being, to have those conversations, develop those committees, so we can
That's the time when
we can have
the
that.
resolution adopted, and as management actually talking about fun stuff, because we want to share what we're doing too, as far as projects and what we're doing. And I feel like that dialogue, we have some things off.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Anyone else?
Is the resolution out at the same time as the revised GSP or?
Just talking to Mike here, I think it'd be nice to have it ahead of time. But I don't I don't know the answer to that yet. We're gonna try and release it so everybody has a crack at it before, before we get to adopting, obviously.
Okay.
So, before we get to our councils and everything. So we might have a special meeting, or we might release it ahead of time. But we'll try to get it out soon. Any other comments, questions? All right. Nothing online. Okay, so wrapping this up, item number 9, the next meeting or next regularly scheduled meeting is on June 12th. I don't think there's any doubt that we'll have that meeting. At least we may have another meeting, and that between now and then, see what we can do. So that would be at 1:30. Again, it'll be here. The thought there is at least present on the GSP revision and kind of a little more detail. And then, yeah, so maybe we'll try to get something in the meantime, possibly. Comments, questions from the member agencies on that? Okay, public?
This new slide, can they be sent out?
Yes.
I got the revised email, but the updated slides weren't.
Yeah, right. We actually just got the slides today, so we can update that link
Perfect,
and
thank
put them on there. Yep. We just wanted to get that in front of everybody sooner rather than later. And it wasn't an action item, so with the special meeting, we thought it was okay to do it short order. Anybody else? Okay. Number 10, committee comments, reports. Anybody?
I do have one from MID. We did issue a survey regarding the district's groundwater replenishment program, long-term groundwater replenishment program. So that survey was issued out via email. And if there's just a reminder, if you have not submitted that survey, please do. We are looking to solicit some input and get some feedback on the program. And if you've not received that survey, you can contact Public Affairs at mid.org, and they can send you a survey to you by email.
How did the workshops turn out?
The workshops were good. We had 2 workshops that were held earlier. Earlier a couple weeks ago.
23rd and 24th.
Yes, thank you, Eric. And so we had 2. We had one downtown Irrigation District, yeah, and then we had one at Waterford Council Chambers, and both were well attended. We had some good questions, so it was good at least to know that the word is getting out for the program, and we were able to field some questions about the program, working with some growers on the east that are interested, and so it's good at least if we got in contact with them.
I got one, and I'm nowhere near to the MID. I'm north of Dry Creek. I don't see how you can supply me any water. So, but I filled out the.
Well, thank you. No, I appreciate it. We appreciate it.
How do you track whether people took the survey 1 time, 2 times, 3 times? Was there any tracking of who took it?
That's a good question. I do not have the answer to that. I would have to defer to our public affairs manager and ask her, but I'm sure there is some type of mechanism that checks the email address, perhaps.
Email addresses.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. No, that's always.
That's the first thing.
Yeah.
Personal first.
Yeah.
Lots of email addresses.
Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. Anybody else? Yeah, nothing. Okay. So yeah, timeline for adoption, July 10th. We're gonna get this thing adopted. We're going to our councils in between, and council and boards, councils or boards. Between now and then, we have a schedule. I need to circle back with Darren and make sure we get City of Riverbanks added to that schedule. But we're going to be putting these out. A lot of us, I think all of us potentially, are going to be going through the government 6066 code for public noticing requirements. Emily has been working on. She got me a draft already today. Yeah, I've got to point her out and give credit where credit's due. She's been working hard on getting some drafts put together for the public notice and then also our agenda. And as well as trying to help out with getting this resolution put together. She's done a really good job with that. So once we have those put together, we're gonna be sharing those, the public notice and the agenda, at least, so you guys can have a template to kind of work with to go to your own council or board. Hopefully that's helpful. And then the resolution, we'll get that out as soon as we can. So draft revisions are anticipated to be released on the 7th of June, so keep an eye out for that. That's all I have. Anything else from anybody? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Right. All those in favor? All right. Thank you.
My ladder was full.
That's all right.